I was 15 minutes into the most important Zoom call of my career, pitching a $75,000 cybersecurity contract to a tech giant in Silicon Valley, when my screen froze like a deer in headlights. My client's face, mid-sentence, mouth half open, looked like a confused cartoon character, and I knew I was toast. By the third glitch, they'd hung up, and I'd lost the deal I'd spent 6 months chasing, all because my internet decided to ghost me in the middle of my big break. I'm Ryan, by the way, a 34-year-old cybersecurity consultant who thought he had everything under control, until that moment. If you've ever had your Wi-Fi stab you in the back at the worst possible time, drop a comment below, and let me know I'm not alone in this nightmare. Before I continue the story, write a comment below. Where are you watching from? Like if you want to constantly win in any conflicts. I live in a picture-perfect suburb in Maple Grove, Minnesota, where the lawns are greener than a Starbucks logo and the HOA rules are stricter than a military boot camp. It's the kind of place where people smile at you on the street, but secretly report your mailbox for being too rustic. I stormed into my living room, my router in hand like it was a ticking time bomb, ready to unleash every tech curse I knew. That's when I glanced at my laptop and saw my download monitor spiking like a roller coaster on steroids. Someone, or something, was sucking my bandwidth dry. My jaw dropped as I traced the culprits. A dozen unfamiliar devices, all connected to my network, and all pointing to one location, my roof. My own roof. I whispered to myself, what in the fresh-baked Target cookie aisle is happening up there? I grabbed a ladder from my garage, my heart pounding like I was about to uncover a government conspiracy. The sun was blazing, kids were riding bikes down the street, and I could hear Mrs. Jenkins across the road yelling at her dog to stop chasing squirrels. I climbed up, sweat dripping down my forehead, and there they were, 3 massive, round 5G Wi-Fi repeaters, bolted into my roof tiles like they owned the place. They were humming away, their little lights blinking mockingly, as if to say, yeah, we're stealing your internet. What are you going to do about it? I nearly slipped off the ladder in shock. At first, I thought it might be some kind of city project, maybe a new 5G rollout I'd missed in the local news. But there were no signs, no notices, not even a passive-aggressive email from the HOA with Comic Sans font. Just these tech parasites, living rent-free on my property. I whipped out my iPhone 16, snapped photos, recorded a quick video, and marched straight to the HOA office in the community center, ready to unleash a storm that would make a reality TV reunion look tame. The office smelled like stale coffee and regret, with a bowl of dusty mints on the counter that probably hadn't been touched since 2015. Behind the desk sat Karen Davenport, the queen bee of the HOA, in a pastel pink cardigan, her smile as fake as the plastic flamingos some neighbors put in their yards. She looked up at me, her eyes gleaming with the kind of smugness that makes you want to scream, and said, "Oh, Ryan, we've been meaning to tell you about our new community connectivity program. We've installed Wi-Fi boosters on select rooftops, and yours was chosen as a central hub." Chosen? As if I'd won a sweepstakes for a free cruise I never entered. I slammed my phone down on the desk, showing her the photos. When exactly did I agree to this, Karen? Because last I checked, my roof isn't a public park for your tech experiments. She slid a piece of paper across the desk like it was a sacred scroll, her smile never wavering. It was a general notice, dated 4 months ago, that had never been mailed to me. Apparently, it had been pinned to the community bulletin board, a sad little corkboard behind the center, next to the dumpster where raccoons threw nightly parties. Karen's logic? Since I didn't respond, I'd given implied consent. I stared at her, dumbfounded, and said, "Karen, that's the kind of reasoning that gets laughed out of a courtroom." She chuckled, patting my hand like I was a confused toddler, and said, "Oh, Ryan, you're such a tech guy. You'll be fine." That's when I knew 2 things. 1, Karen had no clue what I did for a living, and 2, she'd just made the biggest mistake of her HOA career. See, I'm not just some guy who knows how to reboot a router. I used to design network security systems for Fortune 500 companies, the kind of stuff that keeps hackers up at night. These days, I consult for businesses that pay me more for a single firewall than Karen probably spends on her annual HOA budget. I'm the guy they call when a hacker in Eastern Europe tries to breach a company through a smart fridge. And this woman thought she could turn my roof into her personal Wi-Fi hotspot without a fight? I walked out of that office, my blood boiling, But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I was just getting started, and Karen was about to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong nerd. I sat at my kitchen table that night, a cup of Dunkin' coffee in one hand and my laptop glowing like a war room command center, mapping out every single device leeching off my network like digital vampires. I traced their MAC addresses, watched the bandwidth usage spike every time someone streamed a 4K movie, and realized the entire west side of Maple Grove was treating my house like their personal Netflix hub. One guy was even running a crypto mining rig on my Wi-Fi. I could almost hear the HOA laughing behind their clipboards, thinking they'd pulled off the perfect heist. But they didn't know I was about to turn their little scheme into a digital nightmare they'd never forget. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, and let out a laugh that was half disbelief, half pure, unfiltered rage. These people had no idea who they were dealing with. While Karen was probably at home, sipping chamomile tea and planning her next HOA meeting agenda, I was building a plan so beautifully petty, it deserved its own award. I called it Operation Signal Sting, because if they wanted to play dirty, I was going to play smarter. Step 1. Surveillance. I needed to know exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. I spent the next few hours digging through logs, mapping data usage, and cross-referencing IP addresses. What I found made my stomach churn. Over 15 households were siphoning my signal, uploading TikToks, gaming on Twitch, and downloading entire seasons of reality TV. But the real kicker? Those repeaters weren't just stealing my internet. They were wired into my power line, sucking my electricity like greedy little gremlins. I was paying for their late-night binge sessions, and I hadn't even gotten a thank you note. The next morning, I stood in my driveway, sipping a second cup of coffee, staring at the repeaters on my roof while the neighborhood buzzed with its usual routine. Kids were heading to the school bus stop, and I could see Mr. Thompson down the street, meticulously trimming his hedges with a ruler in hand, classic Maple Grove behavior. Meanwhile, my smart meter app was screaming at me. My electricity bill had spiked by $87 last month, and I hadn't even turned on my AC. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. These HOA clowns weren't just stealing my bandwidth, they were draining my wallet, and I was done playing nice. I fired up my laptop again, my fingers flying across the keyboard like I was in a heist movie, and started crafting the first phase of my revenge, a fake splash page that looked like it came straight from a legit internet provider. I named it MapleNet Ultra, complete with a sleek logo I whipped up in Photoshop during a 2 a.m. caffeine binge. The page was a masterpiece, professional colors, official-looking fonts, and a tiny, buried clause that said users agreed to pay 30 cents per megabyte after 100 megabytes of daily usage. To the average neighbor streaming cat videos, it would look like a routine update they'd click through without a second thought. But to me, it was a digital trap, and I was about to catch every freeloader in the act. I pushed the splash page live through the repeater's network, my heart racing as I watched the first connections roll in. Within hours, I had 8 acknowledgments, 8 neighbors had clicked agree without reading a word. I had their names, their IP addresses, and most importantly, their digital consent. I set up a shell company email for MapleNet Ultra services and sent out the first wave of invoices. $45 here, $72 there, just enough to sting without causing a full-on revolt. But the real masterpiece was the invoice I sent to the HOA treasurer, Mr. Larry Bennett, for a whopping $1,942. I watched from my window as he pulled into his driveway, opened his mailbox, and pulled out the bill. His face went from confused to horrified in about 3 seconds flat, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. Meanwhile, across town at the Maple Grove Starbucks, Karen was holding court with her HOA minions, completely unaware of the storm brewing. I'd rigged one of the repeaters with a tiny monitoring cam. Don't ask how. Let's just say I have my ways, and I could see her sipping a pumpkin spice latte, waving her hands dramatically as she complained about ungrateful residents. She had no idea that her own invoice was waiting in her inbox, $2,319 for her TikTok obsession. I could almost picture her face turning the color of her latte foam when she saw it, and the thought made my whole morning. Back at my house, I kept tweaking the system, making sure every kilobyte was tracked, every user was billed, and every invoice looked as official as a tax notice. I wasn't just getting even, I was having fun. I'd spent years building firewalls for companies, but this was personal. I wanted Karen and her HOA cronies to feel the same frustration I'd felt when my Zoom call crashed, the same helplessness I'd felt when I saw those repeaters on my roof. And I wasn't stopping there. Phase 2 was already in motion, and it was going to hit them where it hurt most, their precious Wi-Fi signal. I leaned back in my chair, watching the chaos unfold on my laptop screen like I was directing a blockbuster movie, except this one starred Karen and her HOA minions as the clueless villains. My fake MapleNet Ultra Splash page was working like a charm. Neighbors were paying up, grumbling in their group chats about shady providers, while I sipped my third cup of Dunkin' coffee, feeling like a digital puppet master. But I wasn't done. Not even close. If Karen thought she could turn my roof into her personal Wi-Fi playground, I was about to make her regret every second of it. Phase 2 of Operation Signal Sting was about to hit, and it was going to be a masterpiece of petty revenge. I decided to crank things up a notch by sabotaging the repeater's signal, just enough to drive the neighborhood nuts without them knowing I was behind it. I wrote a little script, something I'd used back in my corporate days to test network stability, but this time I gave it a mischievous twist. Every 5 minutes, the repeaters would drop the signal, reboot, and play a robotic voice message I'd recorded. Service interruption, please contact your provider. I uploaded the script to the repeater's firmware, hit enter, and waited for the fireworks. It didn't take long. Within 20 minutes, the neighborhood WhatsApp group exploded with complaints. Kids were screaming about their Fortnite matches crashing, parents couldn't stream their Hallmark movies, and someone's smart thermostat started acting like it was possessed. I watched it all unfold from my kitchen window, trying not to laugh as Mrs. Carter across the street stomped out to her porch, waving her phone like it had personally betrayed her. Meanwhile, at the Maple Grove Community Center, Karen was in full meltdown mode. I'd tapped into the HOA's private Zoom call. Don't judge me, they were using my network, so I figured I had a VIP pass, and I could see her pacing in front of the camera, her pastel cardigan practically vibrating with rage. This is unacceptable, she shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. Our provider is sabotaging us. I knew we shouldn't have trusted MapleNet Ultra. I nearly spit out my coffee. She was blaming the fake provider I'd created, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the one pulling the strings. Larry Bennett, the HOA treasurer, was on the call too, looking like he'd aged 10 years since he got my $1,942 invoice. He mumbled something about vendor trials, but Karen cut him off, yelling, "We need to fix this before the residents revolt." Oh, Karen, I thought, you have no idea how much worse this is about to get. Back at my house, I kept tweaking the script, adding little touches to maximize the chaos. I set the reboots to happen right during peak streaming hours, 7 p.m., when everyone was glued to their screens. I even threw in a few random disconnects during the day, just to keep them on their toes. The neighborhood was descending into digital anarchy, and I was loving every second of it. But then I noticed something on my smart meter app that made my blood boil all over again. The repeaters weren't just using my electricity, they were causing spikes that could damage my system. I traced the wiring and found a shoddy splice into my main power line, hidden behind a junction box that had been painted to blend in with my house. This wasn't just theft, it was reckless. I could almost hear Karen's smug voice saying, "You'll be fine," and it lit a fire in me that burned hotter than a Minnesota summer. I was about to escalate my plan when fate handed me the perfect ally. I was in my front yard, taking photos of the junction box for evidence, when Mrs. Evelyn Harper, my neighbor 2 doors down, shuffled over with a glass of iced tea and a sun at the size of a satellite dish. She was in her 70s, always gardening, and I'd assumed she was just a sweet retiree who liked to talk about her roses. But as she handed me the tea, she squinted up at my roof and said, "I see what they did up there. They tried the same nonsense on my roof 10 years ago, but they didn't know I used to work for the FCC." I nearly dropped the glass. Evelyn wasn't just a gardener. She was a retired federal compliance officer who'd spent decades busting illegal tech installations. Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she added, "Show me what you've got, and I'll help you make them pay." I invited her inside, and within 10 minutes, we were poring over repeater logs and power usage graphs like 2 spies plotting a takedown. While Evelyn and I were bonding over our shared hatred of the HOA, Karen was at the Target on Weaver Lake Road, buying poster board for an emergency community meeting to address the Wi-Fi crisis. I saw her through my repeater cam, muttering to herself as she picked out markers in HOA-approved colors. She had no idea that Evelyn and I were already compiling a formal FCC complaint, complete with photos, logs, and a detailed report of the HOA's violations. But I wasn't ready to play that card just yet. I wanted to have a little more fun first. I turned to Evelyn, who was sipping her tea and grinning like a kid on Christmas morning, and said, "Let's make their Wi-Fi a living nightmare before we bring down the hammer." She nodded, and I knew I'd found the partner in crime I didn't know I needed. I was sitting on my couch, a bowl of popcorn in my lap, watching the Maple Grove WhatsApp group light up like a 4th of July fireworks show, when I realized just how much chaos I'd unleashed. My little signal sabotage script was working overtime. Every 5 minutes, the repeaters dropped, and the neighborhood was losing its collective mind. One mom posted, "My son's Zoom class got disconnected 3 times today. I'm about to lose it." Another guy chimed in, "I can't even watch the Vikings game without buffering. What's going on?" I popped a kernel in my mouth, grinning like a kid who'd just pulled off the ultimate prank. But the best part? They were all blaming MapleNet Ultra, the fake provider I'd invented, while Karen was scrambling to save face. I could almost hear her heels clicking furiously as she prepared for her emergency meeting at the community center. Evelyn was over at my place, her sun hat perched on my kitchen counter like a trophy, as we reviewed the FCC complaint we'd been building. She pointed at a graph of the repeater's power usage and said, "This splice into your line is a textbook violation. Sloppy work, too. I've seen better from amateurs in the 80s. Her voice had the kind of calm authority that made you feel like you were about to win a war, and I was all in. But before we sent the complaint, I wanted to turn up the heat a little more. I looked at Evelyn, my eyes gleaming with mischief, and said, "Let's give them one last push, something they'll never forget." She raised her glass of iced tea and a toast, and I got to work on the next phase of Operation Signal Sting, the ultimate Wi-Fi prank. I modified the repeater's firmware again, this time turning them into decoys. Instead of providing internet, they now broadcast a Wi-Fi network named KarenStoleYourBandwidth. Anyone who tried to connect got redirected to a landing page I designed, with bold red letters that read, "Ask the HOA why your Wi-Fi is trash." I hit deploy, and within an hour, the neighborhood message boards were flooded with screenshots. Someone posted, "Who did this? This is savage." Another neighbor replied, "I don't know, but they're my hero." A meme popped up in the group chat, Karen's face photoshopped onto a router with the caption, "Bandwidth Bandit." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my popcorn. Evelyn clapped her hands, her eyes sparkling, and said, "Ryan, you're a genius. They'll be talking about this for years." While the neighborhood was buzzing with my Wi-Fi prank, Karen was at the community center, trying to control the narrative at her emergency meeting. I'd hacked into their Zoom feed again. Yes, I know, I'm terrible, but they were still using my network, so I figured I deserved a front row seat. Karen stood at the podium, her face redder than a Target shopping cart, waving a stack of papers as she ranted about unreliable vendors and digital sabotage. Larry Bennett sat in the corner, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, while another board member, Mrs. Susan Carter, suggested they tear the whole system down before someone sues us. Karen snapped, "We're not tearing anything down. We just need to find the culprit." I smirked, knowing they'd never suspect the quiet cybersecurity guy down the street. Back at my house, I was already planning my next move when I got a notification from my smart meter app. Another power spike, this one big enough to make my lights flicker. I stormed outside, flashlight in hand, and traced the wiring again. The HOA's contractor had done such a shoddy job that the splice was starting to overheat. My house could have been at risk if I hadn't caught it. I was furious, but I channeled that anger into something productive. I called Evelyn over, and we spent the next hour documenting everything. Photos of the wiring, screenshots of the power spikes, even a video of the repeaters humming away on my roof. "This is gold," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "They won't know what hit them when the FCC gets this." Meanwhile, the fallout from my Wi-Fi prank was spreading faster than I'd expected. The KarenStoleYourBandwidth network had become the talk of Maple Grove. Someone even printed the landing page message and taped it to the community bulletin board, right over Karen's general notice from months ago. Residents were starting to ask questions. Why were the repeaters installed without consent? Why was I footing the electric bill? And why was their Wi-Fi suddenly a nightmare? Karen tried to deflect, sending out a community-wide email blaming external hackers. But the cracks in her HOA empire were starting to show. People weren't buying her excuses anymore, and I could feel the tide turning in my favor. I stood in my driveway, staring at the repeaters on my roof as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Maple Grove. The neighborhood was buzzing with whispers of rebellion, and I could feel the momentum building like a storm ready to break. My Karen Stole Your Bandwidth prank had lit a fire under the residents. Group chats were flooded with complaints, memes, and questions about the HOA's shady Wi-Fi scheme. I'd even seen a kid on a bike wearing a t-shirt with the landing page message printed on it. Ask the HOA why your Wi-Fi is trash. I couldn't help but grin. But I wasn't just here to watch the chaos. I was ready to deliver the final blow that would bring Karen's HOA empire crashing down. Evelyn and I had finished our FCC complaint, a 20-page masterpiece packed with photos, logs, and a scathing breakdown of every regulation the HOA had violated. We submitted it online that morning, and I could almost hear the gears of justice starting to turn. But I wasn't about to sit back and wait for the feds to do their thing. I wanted to see Karen squirm a little more. I'd been monitoring the HOA's private emails through the repeaters network. Yes, I know. I'm a little too good at this. And I saw that Karen had scheduled a closed-door emergency meeting to resolve the Wi-Fi crisis. Perfect. I decided to give the residents a front-row seat to the drama. I streamed the meeting live to a private Facebook group I'd created called Maple Grove Mutiny, inviting a few trusted neighbors who'd been vocal about their HOA frustrations. Within minutes, over 60 people were watching, and the comments were pure gold. She's losing it. Why is Ryan paying for this? Karen needs to go. At the community center, Karen was unraveling in real time. I watched the feed on my laptop, a glass of lemonade in hand, as she stood at the podium, her voice cracking with desperation. We're under attack by digital vandals, she shouted, her hands flailing like she was swatting invisible bees. Larry Bennett, the treasurer, was sweating bullets, muttering about unverified invoices he'd paid to MapleNet Ultra, my fake company. Another board member, Mrs. Susan Carter, looked like she was ready to bolt, whispering to Larry, "We could get sued for this." Karen snapped, "No one's suing anyone. We just need to find the hacker." I chuckled, knowing they'd never pin this on me. Not yet, anyway. The residents watching the stream were eating it up, their anger boiling over as they realized just how deep the HOA's deception went. Back at my house, I was already planning my next move when I got a knock on the door. It was Mr. Daniel Brooks, a retired lawyer who lived across the street, holding a stack of papers and looking like he'd just won the lottery. "Ryan, I saw the stream," he said, his eyes gleaming. "I've been waiting for a chance to take down Karen for years. She fined me $500 for a non-compliant birdhouse last summer. Can you believe that? I want in." I invited him inside, and within 10 minutes, he was helping me draft a formal request for an HOA transparency audit, citing obscure bylaws that forced the board to disclose all spending and decisions from the past year. We sent it as a certified letter to the HOA office, with digital copies emailed to every resident in Maple Grove. Karen wasn't just facing a few angry neighbors now. She was staring down a full-blown uprising. While Daniel and I were putting the finishing touches on the audit request, Karen was at the Starbucks on Weaver Lake Road, trying to salvage her reputation over a caramel macchiato. I saw her through my repeater cam, sitting with a few loyal HOA members, her face a mix of fury and panic as she scrolled through the neighborhood group chat on her phone. "They're calling me a bandwidth bandit," she hissed, slamming her cup down so hard that foam spilled onto the table. Her cronies tried to calm her down, but I could tell she was cracking under the pressure. And that's when I decided to push her over the edge. I sent her a personal invoice from MapleNet Ultra for $2,500. Her TikTok usage alone had racked up quite the bill. I watched her open the email on her phone, her eyes widening in horror, and then she let out a scream that I swear I could hear from my house 3 miles away. The next morning, the fallout was in full swing. Residents were confronting Karen during her usual morning walkthrough, waving printouts of the streamed meeting and demanding answers. Someone had taped a screenshot of her digital vandals rant to the community bulletin board, right next to a flyer for a lost cat. Karen tried to deflect, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the residents weren't having it. They wanted to know why I was paying the electric bill for their Wi-Fi, why the repeaters were installed without consent, and why their internet was a nightmare. Karen doubled down, issuing a new round of fines for community defamation, but it only made things worse. The residents were done with her excuses, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole HOA board collapsed under the weight of their own mess. I stood on my roof, a screwdriver in one hand and a trash bag in the other, as I unscrewed the last of the repeaters, yanking the cables with a satisfying tug that felt like I was pulling the plug on Karen's entire HOA reign. The sun was setting over Maple Grove, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I could hear kids laughing down the street, finally free from the buffering nightmare I'd turned off. I dropped the repeaters into the trash bag with a dramatic thud, filming the whole thing on my iPhone 16 for the neighborhood group chat. The video went viral in minutes. Someone captioned it, "The Fall of the Bandwidth Bandit," and another neighbor added, "Not all heroes wear capes." I climbed down the ladder, my heart pounding with a mix of triumph and relief, knowing I just won the weirdest suburban war in history. If you've been following this wild ride, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories where this came from, and I'd love to have you along for the next adventure. The fallout from the streamed HOA meeting had been nothing short of spectacular. Karen's empire was crumbling faster than a stale Target cookie, and the residents were done playing nice. The transparency audit request Daniel and I had sent forced the HOA to open their books, and what they found was a goldmine of shady dealings. Karen had authorized thousands of dollars in pet projects, including a $3,000 fountain for her backyard that she'd claimed was a community enhancement. The residents were livid, and at the next open community meeting streamed live for the first time ever, they voted to remove Karen from the board in a landslide. Evelyn stepped up as interim president, and her first act was to cancel all pending citations, dissolve the Community Connectivity Initiative, and propose a new cooperative agreement where residents could vote on tech upgrades. I watched the meeting from my couch, a slice of pizza in hand, cheering as Karen stormed out, her pastel cardigan trailing behind her like a defeated flag. While the neighborhood celebrated their newfound freedom, I was putting the finishing touches on my own victory. I drafted a proposal to take over Maple Grove's internet infrastructure, offering high-speed Wi-Fi with transparent billing, privacy guarantees, and zero HOA interference. I presented it directly to the residents, bypassing the old board entirely, and within 3 days, 70% of the neighborhood had signed up. They trusted me more than they'd ever trusted Karen, and I couldn't blame them. I set up a legit company, Maple Grove Digital Solutions, and got all the proper licenses. Thanks to Evelyn's FCC connections, I was untouchable. Karen tried to block the proposal, claiming I was forming a monopoly, but she hit a brick wall when she realized I'd already crossed every legal T and dotted every I. She even called the city to report me, but the clerk just laughed and said, "Sounds like you picked the wrong guy to mess with." Karen's downfall didn't stop there. A week after she was ousted, I got word that she'd put her house up for sale. I saw the moving truck pull up one Saturday morning, her pastel furniture loaded into the back as she avoided eye contact with the neighbors who'd once feared her. Rumor had it she couldn't connect to the new Wi-Fi network I'd set up. Ironic, right? And she was too proud to ask me for help. Her house sold in a flash, and the new owners, a young couple named Josh and Emily, moved in with their 2 kids and a golden retriever. They saw my setup and brought over a welcome basket with a note that said, "Heard you're the Wi-Fi king, glad to be your neighbors." I invited them over for coffee, and we laughed about the whole saga over blueberry muffins from the local bakery. The cherry on top came a few weeks later, when a small package arrived at my door with no return address. I opened it carefully, half expecting another HOA citation, but instead, I found a miniature Wi-Fi router trophy engraved with the words "King of Wi-Fi, Maple Grove Edition." I laughed so hard I nearly cried, placing it on my shelf next to a photo of my dog in a Vikings jersey. I never found out who sent it, but it felt like the perfect reward for everything I'd been through. My consulting business was booming. I had 40 clients in the neighborhood alone, all thanks to word of mouth from residents who now saw me as their digital savior. I even installed a small weather station on my roof where the repeaters used to be, just to rub it in a little. It doubled as a bird perch, and I'd catch Evelyn waving at me from her garden, calling me her digital watchdog. Maple Grove was a different place now. People waved at each other, not out of fear of citations, but because they finally felt like they belonged. The HOA, under Evelyn's leadership, was transparent, fair, and focused on what the residents actually wanted. And me? I turned a petty power grab into a full-scale neighborhood revolution, all without breaking a single law. I didn't set out to be a hero, but if outsmarting Karen and her HOA cronies meant I got to be the king of Wi-Fi, I'd take the crown any day. So, if you're ever in a neighborhood where the HOA thinks they can mess with your rights, just remember, sometimes the best revenge is a steady connection, a few lines of code, and a whole lot of patience. Subscribe and share the video with your friends. Let them learn the method of fighting HOA too.